Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon for our discussion, for Jeff and I's discussion on mastering estate planning, securing your family's future with this subtext of generational wealth and taxes. So a lot of topics, a lot of ground that we're going to cover. As Jeff said, if you have a question, go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we'll do our best to make sure that we address those questions. Because after all, this is for you, and this is a presentation that we hope you can take a few bullet points from to have a meaningful impact for your family, for your estate plan, for your life. That's what this is all about. So a lot of content. Super important topic. I know for myself, I updated my estate plan 3 years ago, and it's something that I continue to keep an eye on, that we all need to continue to keep an eye on, both as our lives evolve, but also, and as we're going to talk a little bit about today, as estate planning law changes, as taxes change. We need to stay in front of this. And we also need to understand the tools that we have available to make the most of it as well. So in terms of our agenda today, Jeff and I will do quick introductions about ourselves. I want to talk a little bit about kind of what is a financial plan. Yes, estate planning is a financial plan, but also tax planning, right? Like also investment planning, income planning, budget planning. There's a lot that makes up a financial plan. And there's a lot of ways specifically that we support folks here at Merriman to capture all of those elements. I'm going to spend some time talking about types of taxes. So I think estate taxes are super important and we need to be mindful of them. But let's start with the basics. Let's make sure that we're optimizing for income taxes, for capital gains taxes, so on and so forth. And then we can kind of go to level 2.0 and start to talk about these other taxes. Jeff's going to talk a little bit about generational wealth planning. So some of the tools, some of the tactics, some of the items that we can use, trust planning, so on and so forth, to make effective use of your estate plan, right? And then I'll wrap up with kind of how we help folks and some year-end tax planning items as well. So my name is Lowell Parker. I'm a certified financial planner. I've been with Merriman for 20 years, really my whole working career. I am a partner with the firm. My kind of first foray into investments and into planning started when I was a freshman in high school. My math teacher at the time was talking about the virtues of the power of compounding interest. It was an interesting time with respect to being kind of at the top of the tech bubble. And so I think some of his projections, let's say, on assumptions for the rate of return were a little bit lofty. But nonetheless, it was a wonderfully important kind of lesson for me. And I think the thing that stuck with me more than anything was just, how, if we do this correctly, right, for ourselves, for others, obviously we're taking care of families here at Merriman. If we do this correctly from a estate planning perspective, from a tax optimization perspective, with respect to the power of compounding interest, from an investment plan perspective, there is so much we can accomplish if we do this right. There's so many wonderful things that we can do, for ourselves, for others, if we can be intelligent with putting all of these pieces together. So the lesson I learned, kind of back then, high school math was super important, and gosh, I don't even know how many years, but a number, let's say decades of years later, it sticks with me, and it was an important kind of foundational piece. So a little bit about that. Personally, I live in Snoqualmie with my two kids, who are 10 and 12, my wife. And I don't know, we enjoy all the stuff that Northwestern people enjoy, I guess, in terms of recreation, skiing, golfing, all that good stuff. I do spend, quite a bit of my practice working with mid-career technology professionals. So that's kind of my niche, if you want to call it that. But as Jeff will talk about, we work with a variety of other folks as well, retirees, pre-retirees, so on and so forth. So Jeff, let me kick it over to you.
Thank you, Lowell. My name is Geoff Curran. I'm a partner owner at Merriman and an advisor as well. I've been doing this for over 14 years. I've been at Merriman for over 8. I'm a certified public accountant, a chartered financial analyst, and a certified financial planner. All that really means that I probably used up a lot of my time in my 20s studying. Don't worry, I've worked on hobbies after that. Going back kind of my origin story with this, I've known I've wanted to do this since the 7th grade. And, I was fortunate. I used to go down to the lake. I grew up in Kansas City. We went to the Lake of the Ozarks with my family friends, or with my friends' families. And I was in the front seat, and they were business owners, and I was able to pick their brain about every topic. As you can imagine, a 7th grader probably has a lot of weird, unique, but also direct questions. And they created a fun environment for me. And to this day, I want to have an environment for my clients where they can ask any and all questions about finances, and they get a fair answer to it, and they get research on it. In this photo, I have 2 young kids. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, George and Calvin, and also my wife, Christina. We live in Gig Harbor. Hobbies wise, I've had to do after studying for a period of time. I roast coffee beans. I had clients who got me into roasting coffee beans. I do like coffee. And then, I wrote a lot of financial planning books, and I found people don't read that stuff. So I started writing fiction on my train ride to work to Seattle. So I published a couple of fiction books as well, too.
Jeff, I want you to know that I read those books, both varieties.
I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. And before we jump in, I do want to mention I updated my estate plan this year too. My wife and I, we went to an attorney that I refer clients to. We went through the whole process. We went through talking about the tough conversations, where things go, if anything happened in our marriage, what happens if something happens to us and for our children. We went through those tough conversations again. We did it 5 years ago, and we just went through it again. And I think we have a better plan now. And the next time we do it, we're going to have an even better plan. I do recommend you change the state you live in. You need to update it. Something changes in your life, marriage, divorce, children, an update or a plan needs to be put in place. Your wealth changes where you had a certain amount, now you have more. That's a good reason for it. So let's jump into what is financial plan. What is a financial plan? Because it really integrates, as Lowell mentioned, with an estate plan. Things that come up when you meet with an attorney, when you're going through the intake form, which we like to help clients through. How much money do you make? Because it gives a general idea of the tax complexity that you have. How much do you save? An idea of where we are. What are the inputs into your financial plan? Where do you save your money? Do we have an employer plan? Do we have a pension plan? Are we adding money to a non-retirement account? Are we adding money to college savings? All of these things build into your financial goals. What is your current tax exposure? Do you have a lot of capital gains? If you sell assets, do we have to pay a lot of capital gains tax? Do we have limitations there? How can you mitigate tax today, tomorrow, and in the future? Those are things that need to be considered. That's part of a financial plan and how we do that now and for the rest of your life. Charitable intent needs to be known as part of this. Doesn't mean you have to have a charitable intent. It's a matter of, do you have one? You should talk about it. How should we be funding that? Should that be now while you're alive or in your estate? Is this something you do want to explore further, or knowing that it's in your database of ideas to talk about with an advisor in your family? Do you need to plan for estate taxes? Do you live in Washington State? Do you live in Oregon? Do you live in Massachusetts? I'm naming states that have estate tax that are pretty high, that you get hit pretty quickly. California, we don't have an estate tax issue there, but we have high income taxes there. We need to think about income tax. We need to think about all these items. Expected growth of your wealth over time. Should that be on your balance sheet or your family member's balance sheet that you intend to inherit your wealth? We want to understand what you want to accomplish. We need a lot of inputs, ingredients that go into it to figure out what the plan should be. And then we need to monitor and iterate and deal with your evolution as you go through life. You're in Washington, you move to a different part of the country. We have to evolve and adapt, and your plan needs to account for it.
Great, thanks, Jeff. So I just want to kind of set the stage. We're talking about current taxes that we face on kind of a year-over-year basis, and also just this notion that I alluded to earlier, which is to say, let's make sure that we've got all of our foundational pieces in order, that we're optimizing on a year-over-year basis, right? Before we potentially get into more complicated strategies, right? So just building upon the basis, productive for sure. So most people are familiar with these items. I'm not going to spend a ton of time. If people have questions, you can feel free to type them into the chat box there. That's not a problem. We'll cover them. But just in review of taxes that we face on a year-over-year basis, right? So most people, all people know what income taxes are. This is tax on your earned income, right? So everybody knows it on a federal level. Some people know it on a state level. California, for example, as Geoff mentioned a second ago, definitely has state income taxes. If you live in California, you are highly aware of that. So we need to understand what that is. We need to understand how we can manage and mitigate those taxes, right? And all of these taxes, because if you're thinking about kind of generational wealth and keeping money, within your family, any money that you can save this year, next year, year over year means more money in the estate, right? And then we can talk about how to mitigate it on the estate tax level as well. So income taxes, we're all exposed to those. Capital gains taxes. So if you have invested in something and it has appreciated and you decide to sell it for whatever reason, you want to invest in something else, potentially you're generating income in retirement, potentially, or some other reason. If you hold that for longer than a year, it becomes a long-term capital gain. Pretty darn straightforward. Most people would experience that at a 15% capital gains rate. There's also a slight chance for 0% and a chance for 20% as well. Not going to get into those details. Those are long-term capital gains. Any short-term capital gains, so you bought something that appreciated, you sell it in less than a year, that becomes basically income tax to you. I think, again, most people are pretty familiar with these things. There's a variety of ways we can strategize around mitigating these items. And again, if we can do that and there is opportunity there's more money in our estate, and then we can strategize on the state level to avoid state taxes as well, potentially. Other taxes that people face, these are probably less known, less common than, say, your standard income or capital gains taxes. But certainly there's net investment income tax, there's Medicare tax on earned income. These things start to pile up. We have to be mindful of them. And then there's this Washington State capital gains tax of 7% as well. And then there's estate taxes on top of that. And so we're going to talk just kind of broadly before we get into strategies around estate taxes in actually 2 slides. But before we do that, I'm going to come back to this kind of broad point that we have is let's manage taxes today. If we save taxes today, we've got more money in the estate, our family has more wealth, we have more opportunities, more possibilities for spending, for giving, all these things, right? So in terms of just some baseline income tax strategies to give consideration to generally, and probably with respect to the year end coming up pretty soon. Make sure that you're optimizing all of your employer plans, right? So you can save a pretty significant amount of money in your 401k and your 403b. Some people have deferred compensation. There's a variety of different options that you can tap into depending upon your specific situation to mitigate taxes today. Obviously, you've got kind of pre-tax Roth options that you can choose from within your 401k. Some companies also offer what's called a mega backdoor Roth 401k, which really sets you up for effective tax planning in the future. And also legacy planning in the future, having Roth assets and not pre-tax assets. And then when we think about basics, we also think about health savings accounts. Health savings accounts are the best. Like from a taxation perspective, not only do you get a deduction, not only does it grow tax-free, but it's distributed tax-free as well. So it's a pretty incredible solution to optimize. Again, let's just build the basics and then we can go from there. Review your annual charitable strategy. So if you are giving on an annualized basis, are you giving cash? Should you give appreciated securities? Do you have a year of exceptionally high income, and do you want to give a larger amount? Do you want to do that outright? Do you want to do it into a donor advised fund so you can kind of manage it into perpetuity? These are all questions that we need to understand, both with respect to, again, this year's taxes, but also with our future estate taxes. Then we can kind of get crafty and we can move into, let's call it beyond the basics, right? So we can talk about asset location. Asset location is just this discussion, this framework is something that we do very intentionally for our clients here at Merriman, of reducing the income tax burden that your investment portfolio experiences on a year-over-year basis. So just making sure that we're being optimal with which assets belong in which account. Again, if we can reduce tax drag there, we've got more money year over year and with respect to our estate plan. Certainly, there's more nuanced charitable strategies. We're going to talk about some of those from an estate plan perspective later on. But even like a donor advised fund, giving appreciated securities as opposed to cash, those sorts of things are super important. 529 planning, right? So if you have a child and they're, let's just say, age 0, you've kind of got 18 years to get that going. So what does that look like, and how do we want to ramp that up? Roth conversion planning, right? If you are, for example, you retired in your 50s or early 60s, pre-Social Security, there could be some interesting strategies around Roth conversions. For example, maybe you took a sabbatical, you don't have any income in any given year. There could be some interesting opportunities for Roth conversions for sure. So again, let's get the basics down, and then we can build on top of that, and then hopefully put ourselves in a position where, estate taxes become more of a problem, but then understanding the tools that we have to solve that problem, like Geoff's going to talk about.
We want to remind you that over 90% of charitable giving is people via their checkbook or credit cards. If done correctly, it could be done via appreciated investments, where you are able to avoid the capital gain and get the same itemized deduction and a lot of flexibility. Just an area to come back to and talk about in the future.
So when we do think about estate taxes, we certainly can understand what federal estate taxes look like. So it's, I would say on average, relatively large numbers. So for 2024, if an individual passes away and their estate is worth less than, we'll just round 13.61 to 14, don't worry about it. It's not a problem. Not going to be exposed to federal estate taxes. If you're married, it's kind of 2x, so call it a clean 28 million, right? So if you're below those thresholds, it's not a problem, right? If you are above those thresholds, you can see on the right-hand side what the marginal estate tax brackets look like. And you can see, I think the first thing that jumps to me is they scale up pretty quickly. I would think, maybe generally, but also relative to, marginal income tax brackets, for example. So the one thing that we do have to be mindful of is if the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 does, in fact, sunset, they don't extend it, nothing changes. These thresholds effectively get cut in half, right? And so it was 13.61, it was 27.22. It's now, call it 7 and 14. And so that does open up estate tax, could potentially open up estate taxes to a much broader set of persons, right? So with that said, 2025, we'll see. Geoff and I are staying in front of this stuff. 2025 could be an interesting planning year, no doubt about it. So definitely something for consideration. I think the other bullet point of consideration there is if it does play out like this, strategizing in early 2025 is probably more prudent than strategizing in Q4 of 2025 with respect to trying to get stuff, in shape with respect to changes and with respect to attorneys being busy, for example. So just something to give consideration to. As if, income taxes, gains taxes, net investment income tax, federal estate taxes wasn't enough, you may also have exposure to state estate taxes, right? So Geoff alluded to this a bit ago. You can see on top there that which states have exposure: Washington, Oregon, Minnesota, Illinois, Maryland, so on and so forth. But these are smaller numbers, right? So I think, we're headquartered in Washington. We have, a fair amount of number of clients in Washington. The Washington state estate tax is not a big threshold to get past, right? So if you think about, if you live in Washington and you've got a house that's worth, $1.5, $2 million, whatever the number is, you've got, an IRA that's worth a couple, some brokerage accounts, some Roth IRAs. It's not difficult to get over the Washington state estate tax thresholds, right? So there's, some pretty straightforward planning you can do here. Jeff's going to talk about some of the tools, but just be aware, right, that Washington is a lot more approachable, say, than the federal estate tax. And then, another big piece relative to both of these items, and Jeff talked about it earlier, is the assumed growth of your assets through the course of time, right? So for our clients, we've got a pretty clear understanding of what we expect things to grow at over time, and we can kind of look into the future, and we can say, when you are 95 years old, in today's dollars, right? For example, your net worth is X. Okay, so let's think about what that means, and let's think about what we're going to do on a year-over-year basis, for example, or with respect to potentially some irrevocable trust planning, for example. So the point is, give consideration to the growth of your money through the course of time, and understand why you expect it to grow and what it could potentially be, and then what you need to do about it to avoid Washington and potentially federal estate taxes as well. So in terms of, estate planning itself, I know we've talked about a lot today, but when we start to, okay, we've got the building blocks built, right? We're optimizing our income, our gains, our net investment income tax, all of those, we're asset locating, we understand our giving plan, like all of those boxes are checked. Okay, great, perfect. Let's talk about estate planning. So I think I'm going to go pretty high level here because Jeff's going to dive into a lot of the specific tactics. Really, it's kind of three phases, right? In the simplest sense, where do your assets go when you die, right? So if you have an IRA, you've got beneficiaries, it's we all understand what that means. What's the most effective use of the federal and potentially state exemptions? So Jeff's going to talk about that a little bit. How do I freeze my estate? Potentially, how do I pull kind of assets out of my estate today to remove the future growth of those assets? Again, if you're thinking about, what your net worth could be when you're in your 90s, for example, you understand what that looks like. Okay, maybe I need to pull some out now, including the potential 30, 40-year growth on those monies, right? That's very important. Planning tools, most people understand a will. That's kind of your basic straight line planning tool. Beneficiary designations, joint account registrations, irrevocable trusts gets a little more involved, but not super complicated. Gifting, right? So gifting to family members, to really anyone. I mean, you can give $18,000 per year to anybody without having to file a gift tax return for this year. So now Jeff's going to review some of the tools we have available, in addition to some kind of peripheral planning techniques to give consideration to. So Jeff, over to you.
Excellent. Now we're going to dive into the meat. Let's go to the next slide. So the first question is, where do they go when I die? And this is very personal to every client. Do we have children to give to? Yes or no? Do we want our children to receive the money? Yes or no? Do we want our family to? Do we want a charity to? This is your decision, and you can change your decision over time. I think a lot of people are very concerned about others' views and considerations, but you have to remember, this is your estate plan. These are your wishes and desires. And we have a lot of clients that if it doesn't follow like a logical format, we would just encourage writing things down, writing down a letter of instruction or explaining why you made a certain decision to give somebody more money or less money, or give this asset over that asset. So think about, who do I want to inherit my money? Properties, possessions. They can be different for each one. On possessions, you can write it down on a list. You can even put little like color coding on the back of items in your home. We typically recommend doing it on a list and sharing that list with somebody else. If you start gifting things while you're alive to different family members, keep record of it so that people don't have conflict later. Should they inherit outright or in a trust? Should I just give the money outright where there's no strings attached? Or should it be in a trust where there's some kind of constraints? Even if the heir is the trustee, they can be the trustee of their own trust. However, it does add some level of extra thought if it is in a trust when they take money out, because they're kind of liable to themselves and the next generation of the family. Should all my assets go to charities? Which ones? What's the best way to do it? Do I want to change? Do I want to have to go to a lawyer every time I want to update this? Or do I want to have on my retirement account, have a lot of different, I want 20 different charities listed and I can update them as I change my viewpoints. We typically recommend if you're going to change your mind on it, do it from retirement accounts and do it from your pre-tax retirement accounts. Any heirs have to share that money with the government because they pay tax like you do. Well, when a charity gets it, they get 100%. Have I updated my beneficiaries and registered accounts correctly? This is a big one. If you live in California and you have a revocable living trust and you don't update your accounts appropriately, we've got a problem. You spent all that money on the fancy document, but it's not going to do anything for you. And you're back in the same position as if you didn't do it. Updating beneficiaries is very important. People go through life changes, a divorce, children, whatever, you name it. You got to update your beneficiaries. We have reminders at our work of like, hey, have you updated your beneficiaries? And I have to write back yes or no. Individual versus joint account registration. Do you have a family member that, do you have a parent that's aging? Should you be a joint owner on the account? Well, we should talk about that. There are pros and cons to that decision. How does that affect you if you have siblings too? What assets will receive a step up? This thing under our current tax rules that we're not expecting to change at this time, if you have an estate, if you have a non-retirement account that's worth $1 million, but you bought into it for $100,000, you have a $900,000 gain. Under current tax rules, all of that gain goes away. It's like your heirs inherit cash equivalents. Well, what is the most appropriate? If you have children, do you have one child who earns $1 million a year and is in the top tax bracket and one who earns $80,000 a year? Should they inherit different assets? That should be a consideration. You should think about that and educate them on it. Federal and state estate tax planning, a lot of people, this is an uncomfortable topic because it's important to have a plan to make sure your money goes to who you want it to go to. But, the idea that I might gift money before I die, as we're going to talk about on the next slide, it can be kind of complicated because most people, your fear is, I don't want to run out of money and I don't know how much money I'll need. Even if we can show you in a plan, that still is complicated. So we're going to talk about that on the next slide. But state estate tax, in Washington State, Lowell talked about it. Everybody should know about it. If you own a home, you have investment accounts, you own cars, it's very likely you're going to go above it. A simple tool can be added in to protect upon the first spouse to pass away, $2.193 million. It's built into the plan. There's one where it is, we decide, you and your advisor, accountant, etc., decide what should go into it or if you should do it, or the version of it where it's funded mandatory. We often recommend the mandatory funding option when maybe it's a second marriage and you're trying to make sure that your new spouse doesn't disinherit your children or the loved ones that you have. Those are considerations that should be part of this if you have a blended family. On federal estate tax, they allow portability. And portability, if you haven't heard the term before, it just says out loud, you don't need a fancy legal document to make sure that if one spouse passes away, to preserve their estate tax exemption, which right now is over that 12 million. So right now, if somebody passes away, you don't need this fancy document on the federal level to be able to file a gift tax return and say, hey, my surviving spouse gets my over $13 million exclusion. So that is something that can be filed within 5 years of a death. please, please, please do not miss that deadline if you are because they could always reduce the future exclusion. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. Irrevocable trust planning, irrevocable for a decedent. Oftentimes somebody passes away, part of the assets for estate tax planning and state estate tax goes into an irrevocable trust. That is part of a consideration. Disclaimer just means that you have optionality. You can say out loud, I need to fund it, or I don't need. The surviving spouse, after meeting with the advisor and the team, says, you don't need the money. And your heir, the other generation, they do. Maybe your children or grandchildren need the money, and we decide you don't need it. Then they're able to say, I don't want it. They never took possession of it, and it goes directly to that generation. And then charitable giving. You have an unlimited ability to give to charity in your estate. We recommend, if you do in your estate, to do it from a pre-tax retirement account. So how do I freeze my estate at this point? I know there's a lot, like that title, what does that mean? All it is saying is that if we think we have a future potential problem on the Washington or federal level, what can we do now if we're in great financial shape? And that's part of why you need a financial plan, to know if you're in great financial shape. It isn't just a number, it's your number, and your number evolves over time. So less complex ways to do it. Our top recommendation to clients is spend your money. Heirs are going to spend it faster. They're going to buy nicer coffee and a nicer car. That's kind of a joke, but we've seen it happen. But spend your money. We want you to spend your money. That's a great way to do it. Take your family and friends on a trip. Do something special with them now. Help them with their life right now while you're alive. Annual or lump sum gifting. Sometimes people, they want to look at doing annual gifts, as Lowell mentioned, $18,000 per person without having to report anything, or doing a very large one-time gift. I just had a lunch with a client yesterday where we were talking about gift to $500,000 to each child, and believe it or not, we recommended gifting investments rather than cash. The children or the family, they can pay the tax on it. They're still getting a large gift, and the client is able to avoid having to pay capital gains tax, the excise taxes that Lowell mentioned, avoiding any Medicare taxes, extra taxes related to paying the capital gain on it. And they're also, if they're below 65, they're able to avoid losing their healthcare credits because their income got too high. Donating appreciated assets to charity. If you have too much in one type of investments, we can say you can afford to give $100,000. It's a great time if you're at the end of your career in a high income year. Let's do 10 years worth of gifting at one time and get a lot of bang for your buck. We can move the investment over, avoid the capital gain, get the itemized deduction. It's like getting $1.50 for every dollar you're gifting. More complex, do we look at gifting money? Maybe we don't know about, maybe there's a marriage for your children you're unsure about. There's risk with it. Maybe we're talking about a minor. There's a lot of different reasons. Maybe we want to put it into a trust. I had a client where we just did this last year, and they funded trusts for their 2 twin boys. They're very responsible people, but they're the trustee, and they receive money from the trust each year, and it will stay in their family. And we're able to help them with that to make sure that they are recording tax preparation, all of that correctly. Intra-family loans. I want to buy a home. I'm the child. You want to help. You're able to gift or to help people on a loan at a much lower rate, but you're still going to get money back. How to formalize that, how to do that correctly. There are other trusts that are utilized, and you have to be very careful with these. But for the right situation, you can put your home into a trust. If you have a vacation home that you love, you can minimize the estate tax burden of it. But you should be aware, if you die before a certain time period, those benefits go away, and your children or your heirs become your landlord. There's considerations for that, and there's extra tax and legal filings. Or moving money into a spousal lifetime trust. You're married, you move assets to your spouse, and they move money to you. Make sure you trust your spouse if you do that. But it also, there's complications with it. There's extra filings with it, but it could be a good idea to take advantage of the current high estate tax limits right now. After the election yesterday, after the results, we don't know if this is going to change, but right now, unless they renew it, we are expecting effective January 1 of 2026, we're going to go back to our former tax regime. And what that means is that at a high level, the big points for you to think about are right now, and this number is 12.92, but it's higher, it's 13.61. It'll go down to about 7 million. So it'll get cut in half if that goes down. So if you have a federal estate issue where your net worth as an individual is over, as a married couple is over 10 million or 14 or you name it, we need to be thinking about that. We're going, the other issues are that the tax brackets, we didn't get into this, but we right now have historically low tax rates. If you're holding on to an investment because the taxes are so high to sell it, you got to remember we're at an all-time market high. And on top of that, tax rates are at a historic low and they're set to go up in the future. And we've got this national debt thing. Think about that. Maybe right now is that right time to sell if you have too much in one investment. Those are things to go through with your advisor. But there are a couple other items in here that'll come up. They benefit some people over others, going back to the old regime. But I would tell you that if we go back to old regime, like your income tax rates, if on ordinary income, they're higher. People will be on average paying several $1,000s more on their ordinary income on taxes if we go back to the old regime, in addition to these other items. As Lowell highlighted earlier in the presentation, it's important to look at, are we maximizing deductions right now? Or do we have rental properties? Do we have a business? Are we thinking about? Are we looking at charitable giving? Like, we're nearing the year end. This is an excellent time to talk and think about it. Are you contributing to the right account type? So the people that are working on the call, the pre-retirees, are you adding money to the right accounts? Because your accounts at work might have changed over time from when you started working there. How tax efficient are your investments? Are they working together? This is an area where we're really passionate about. We have a white paper on why we do this thing where we manage a portfolio cohesively called asset location, as Lowell mentioned earlier. And what can you do before the end of the year? Lowell and I can tell you, and everybody on the Merriman team can say, getting your estate plan updated, it may not be fun right off the bat, working on it, and it's not free. But afterward, you feel great. I felt great when I did it because I felt safe and secure, and my wife felt great about it. And now we also know, too, we're going to update it as the rules change, if we ever move, any of these items that come up. So please, there's still a great time to update your plan today if you need to do it.
Well, great. Yeah, thank you, everybody, again, for spending time with us this afternoon. We hope that you have a few insights that you can take home and make productive for your plan. We do help folks with this. So, if you're on the call and you're thinking about working with Merriman, we'd be happy to take you through our complimentary process, which effectively will give you our recommendation for financial planning, tax planning, estate planning, investment planning, really the whole thing. So you're welcome to reach out to Jeff, myself. You can also navigate to the website, www.merriman.com, to connect with us, and we would welcome that discussion. We're here to support the families that we currently serve and families that we will serve in the future as well. So feel free to reach out. If you're a client and you're on the call, let us know if you have any questions. If there's people in your life who you think we can support, that Merriman can support, make connections. We love doing this stuff. I think it's complicated, obviously, like we talked about today. It's intertwined, like understanding the relationship between all of these components of your plan is so important, right? And also understanding how they're going to evolve through the course of time. So reach out. We love taking care of people. We do a good job of it. And I guess we'll leave it there unless there's any questions that came through the chat box, Jeff.
We did get one earlier, and Lowell, is it okay if I take it? It's a fun one.
Yeah, go ahead, of course.
Okay. So in this situation, an individual created a revocable living trust in that, it's purely a trust and will in this sense are purely One of them, the revocable living trust, just simplifies things if you die. It makes it easier for your heirs to transfer assets. That's all it is. It's underneath your social security number. There's nothing more complicated to it. It's a little bit more work and money up front, less hassle. We recommend it for people outside of the state of Washington, or if you own property in different states, you own property in Washington and Idaho, for example, we recommend it. So in this scenario, and we're not talking about these complicated irrevocable trusts in this question that was asked that are talked about on TV or that we highlighted earlier too. But the question was, I have I have an employee stock purchase plan through my work. I also have options too. I have stock options at work. I work at a I'll call it a tech company. And can I move them to my revocable living trust? And we'll tell you, because like on a philosophical level, you're not really transferring the ownership to another person. A revocable living trust is you, and if you're married, your spouse. You're not transferring it to a complicated trust that has your children, all these other things involved. So legit, like philosophically, you can do that. Realistically, a lot of places won't let you do it. Like if you go to your employer, whether you have your account at E-Trade through your employer or you name it, they require it to be underneath your individual name. You can't make it a joint account with a spouse. You can't make it a revocable living trust because it's to you, because you are the one underneath their trading rules and other requirements legally. We recommend in those situations, ask the question, but 99% of the time when you still work there, they will not let you update the titling of the account to add a spouse as a joint account or to make it a revocable living trust. So unfortunately, that's going to be probably a non-starter. We recommend adding beneficiaries to that account. Add your spouse as a beneficiary, or if you don't have a spouse, add your children or other loved ones in your estate plan. But go ahead and add a beneficiary to the account, but you generally can't update it. If you can, absolutely, because you're not really doing anything too complicated. You're not transferring your ownership to some third party. The next one is, do you think it's a good idea to add overseas property to your U.S. living trust? Generally, we wouldn't recommend it. If it's in Canada, there's certain cross-border trust planning that you can do, but a lot of countries don't recognize a revocable living trust. So they won't if you have a property in Montana and you have one in Washington, they'll honor it. It'll work exactly as you thought. But if you own a property here and you have an inherited, or you have a property over in the United Kingdom, it may not work exactly that way. We recommend, if the property is valuable, it makes it worthwhile to do this, get an estate plan in that other country and have them linked together. But it's generally not going to have you update the registration to the name of your U.S. revocable living trust. All right, the last one. Sorry, Lowell, I don't mean to be taking all the fun part. Am I taking too much fun from you?
No, you're doing great. Keep it up.
All right, so this is one I've spent a ton of time on. If you have a trust, so on a revocable living trust, remember, you don't make that the beneficiary typically of an IRA, but you could. Well, let's say typically when people are talking about this, they have like an irrevocable trust. Like my children's trust is the beneficiary of a retirement account, not your revocable living trust. But you could have your revocable living trust. So just go according to your estate plan. We recommend talking to your attorney about it. But if you have like your children's trust or this other trust or whatever it is, make sure you work with your attorney on it. Retirement accounts, they have to be drained within 10 years unless a beneficiary is a minor or they're disabled or it's a spouse. So you got to be very thoughtful about that. We typically recommend having, if you have adult children or adult heirs that you think are good at managing money, even if you do want to have an irrevocable trust, but you think that they're in good control of money, we recommend having those IRAs go outright to them. The other assets like your home, your taxable money that's in a brokerage account, that can go via this trust because it's designed, it will flow correctly. There are a lot of pitfalls and minefields in making an irrevocable trust the beneficiary of an IRA or 401k. because it has to be able to see through this IRA or 401k has to see through who these end beneficiaries are and has to link up correctly. In the rules, it can really be a problem if you have a surviving spouse that's listed as an heir under the trust and you have children or a charity. So be very careful and thoughtful. Ideally, we recommend having your family, your heirs be outright on the IRA, and then do these more complicated trusts for non-retirement assets. Any other questions? We can talk about coffee if you guys want to as well. What would you guys like to talk about?
Well, if there's no more questions, Geoff, I think we can go ahead and wrap it up. This recording will be available on demand. You should get an email follow-up, I believe, with it if you want to check back in on anything. And again, if we can support Geoff, myself, Merriman in general, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to have those discussions with you. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and thank you again for your time.